In today's world, what makes our society go round is the right and the opportunity for our citizens to discuss politics, state opinions, and to criticize the government. Peter Zenger was trained as a printer by William Bradford after he immigrated to America in 1710. Mary White, his wife, hoped that Zenger would become a successful official printer of the governor's documents. In August 7, 1731, William Cosby had arrived to New York as the new governor. As soon as he stepped foot in New York, it seemed impossible to find a positive adjective to describe the new governor. Everyone labeled the governor as greedy, dull, despiteful, and many other bad-mannered terms. Peter Zenger's newspaper was written by his backers. Despite this, he was still legally responsible for them. Van Dam and Cosby had many disagreements, including the division of salaries and fees. Cosby wanted to sit as a court of exchequer, which meant the court heard references from the King's Bench. A few years later, just as Cosby required, Morris wrote him a letter explaining his vote, but not as Cosby expected. Morris made the letter public by writing it as a pamphlet, having it printed out by the German immigrant named Peter Zenger. The governor had put up with it for 2 months and then decided it needed to be shut down. His first attempt was in January 1734, when he included the law of seditious libel, but failed.
Well, Mr. Attorney General of the provinces of New York and New Jersey, how did it go?
Oh, quite well, Your Excellency, quite well indeed. A most impressive ceremony.
Lewis Morris rules against him. Then Cosby just goes crazy, and he fires Lewis Morris as chief judge, and that's when all the controversy begins. And so what it shows is that Cosby isn't interested in what we call the rule of law. He's seen as a threat to the liberty of the people because he doesn't want to go to a jury, and then when a judge gives him a decision he doesn't like, he fires the judge.
Delancey was helping the governor accuse Zenger. His second attempt was in October when the grand jury met but again refused to return the indictment.
Zenger would tell us precisely who has been writing all these articles that have appeared in his journal, and a lot of citizens that find themselves facing a charge of seditious libel.
Yes.
His third and final attempt was in November 1734, when he ordered the 4 of the most offensive issues be publicly. The trial of Peter Zenger was a trial taken in 1735. Peter Zenger had a conflict with the court and William Cosby, the governor. Zenger had been charged with seditious libel towards the governor. He accused Governor Cosby of serious statements and mocked him in the New York Weekly Journal, which he printed and published. Andrew Hamilton, his lawyer, argued with the court that this statement weren't libel since they were true. James Delancey, who was appointed the trial judge by Governor Cosby, had returned a verdict of guilty towards Zenger. Jury foreman opposed to this and acquitted him. Andrew Hamilton then decided to request Zenger's case straight to the jury. The compromise of the trial of Peter Zenger led to many things, including setting a precedent for jury nullification, and it gave freedom of speech under the British.
In 1789, the Zenger case became important in history due to the English Bill of Rights since it contained the freedom of press. In 1791, it was later added as the First Amendment to the Constitution, and it guaranteed that all people in the United States could discuss political issues without restrictions. The conflict in the trial of Peter Zenger is that he was charged with libel unjustifiably. They compromised by agreeing with Hamilton it cannot be libel if it is true and creating the freedom of press which was given under the British law. The British law and the English law is the same thing and therefore affects us. Thanks to this trial, we now have freedom of press. Today, Americans see the ability to form your own opinion and criticism as a basic human right, a luxury that colonial America didn't have. The political context of Zenger helps us understand the culture that led to free speech to become the darling of the people. Without the right of open debate on any topic, the United States would be hollow and weak. The printing press was invented in the 1400s, and what could be published was tightly regulated. John Zenger had placed an advertisement in his paper of a lost spaniel that seemed to represent one of the governor's main men. He then ran another advertisement which described a runaway monkey of the larger sort with a war saddle, pistols, and sword, who fancied himself a general. Zenger was the first of many printers to entertain and educate their readers on disliked governors. After the public burning issue in November, 10 days later, Cosby had Zenger arrested for seditious libel. Zenger was unable to afford bail, so he spent more than 8 months in prison awaiting trial. Zenger was put on trial for seditious libel against William Cosby. Zenger didn't care if the Supreme Court and the judge thought he was guilty. Back then, the word libel simply meant information was given to the public that opposed the government. The governor had input James Delancey in charge of the case. Previously, Chief Justice Lewis Morris was part of the Supreme Court, but he was later removed due to a conflict with the governor. Cosby was the New York governor who was accused of using arbitrary power.
I should think it my duty, if required, to go to the furthest part of this land to fight persecutions that aim at depriving a people of the right of remonstrating, aye, and of complaining too, against the arbitrary attempts of men of power, men who injure and oppress the people under their administration. Provoke them to cry out and complain. Then make that very complaint the foundation for new oppressions and persecutions.
Zenger was finally brought to trial on August 4, 1735. During the trial, James Delancey had detailed instructions by Cosby to send the verdict as guilty. As the case was taking place, many of the Supreme Court had no doubt that Zenger was guilty, but jury foreman said he wasn't. In response, Andrew Hamilton directed his defense to the jury instead of the judge. He stated that Zenger had published articles against Cosby, but eloquently argued that because the articles contained truths in the form of facts, they could be libelous.
What Hamilton was trying to do is redefine the stakes of the trial so that the focus wasn't on did John Peter Zenger publish this material, but how do we understand liberty of the press, freedom of opinion.
Once Hamilton presented his statements to the jury, they returned with their verdict of not guilty. The charge against Zenger was used during this period to hold one's tongue towards printers and keep them from talking bad about the British government. Mary White Morris passed away, and with time, Anna Katharina Mullen became his official spouse and helped Zenger along the way. The weekly journal continued to appear with the help of Zenger's wife, Anna. She continued to print and publish while her husband was unavailable.
Anna, you're the 7 wonders of the world rolled into one. How do you do it all? Everyone's asking the same question. You have a house to look after and 4 children, and yet, on top of all that, you come down to the printing press and you put out the journal every week. How do you do it?
Oh, by just doing it. It keeps me from thinking.
Judge Delancey instructed the jury that they decide only whether Zenger had published the issues of the New York Weekly Journal. Despite this instruction, the jury found Zenger not guilty of publishing seditious libel. Cheers rang around in the crowded courtroom. Andrew Hamilton's success was celebrated by a dinner in his honor at the Black Horse Tavern. In 1735, he was presented with the freedom of the city. John Peter Zenger was released from prison the day after the trial. He returned to his printing business and published an account of his trial. One of Zenger's attorneys published a brief narrative of the trial of John Peter Zenger. This book circulated throughout the 1800s and was reprinted in times of crisis up to the 1950s. Once free speech and press became common within the colonies, it became deeply ingrained in our culture. The Zenger trial began debates over the meaning of freedom of press. Zenger then died from eating a poisonous rabbit in New York on July 28, 1746, and is rumored to be buried in Trinity Churchyard in Lower Manhattan. His wife continued the family business until Zenger's eldest son, John, replaced her as head of the print shop in December 1748. John Zenger continued publication of the journal for another 3 years. As a result of this trial and the English government, the Constitution addressed freedom of the press and speech in the First Amendment. Attacking those in power became more prominent after the Revolution. It is important to know that the Zenger trial did not create freedom of press. It influenced how people thought about things like this, which led to the protections put in the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Sedition Act of 1798. The leveler and radical Whig ideology of England made little headway there because they were truly threatening to the government. However, these arguments seemed perfect, sensible, and just plain right in the American context. Zenger case demonstrated growing independence, as a Governor Morris said. The Zenger case was the germ of American freedom, the morning star of that liberty which subsequently revolutionized America. The image shows the parade float that was made in order to remember the trial of Peter Zenger.